Myrana only had seconds to prepare his next actions. The sword Stare of Ruin was a fearsome weapon. The shrunken, polished and glossy skull on the pommel's eyes glowed red in preparation to blast their beams of piercing, burning, magically coherent light. Detos had been the victim of similar artifacts. Rings of red ruin were not common, but common enough that Lord Detos had contingencies too. He depressed a mechanical lever at the front of the dread chariot that mechanically moved a piston that lowered a shroud over the horse's eyes, and he also lowered a black visor. The Maximilian plate armor he wore and the barding on the war horses was sufficient to stop the beam, and now their eyes were protected. Myrana had indeed intended to blind, wound or disable Lord Detos or his dread chariot's battle-hardened draft horses with the red beams that would have shot at blinding speed from the sockets of the skull on the pommel. But now, thinking quickly, he drew a flask of silvery magical oil from his sling bag. Throwing it towards the feet of the leading horse, it shattered and smashed on the ground, covering a reasonable area in mirrored, liquid, chrome-like oil that separated the tinctures of light into enthralling pictures. The war horse, who had been struck twice with the magical rain whip, was in a furious rage, until he was surprised at the beautiful visages of waterfalls, green grass and sunshine he saw in the pool, and he stopped abruptly. The stallion was even more surprised when two red beams reflected off the surface of the Idea-Leak animated scene and burned into his face under the visor and reflected then off the inside of the visor and burned his retinas out. Lord Detos was outraged, and he snapped down on the cat of nine tails' reins 3 times, wild lightning emanating outwards and sparks setting the nearby invasive vegetation on fire that glowed in an unholy green tinge. The chariot was again in motion. Myrana dived quickly to his left and rolled. As he pivoted and somersaulted while turning, he threw the sword at a calculated angle to strike the steering column on the articulated horse-drawn vehicle and pierce through the metal hub of the front wheel, thereby causing the vehicle to lurch suddenly to the right. Detos tried in vain to correct, and in using his supernatural strength to wrench the control across, overcorrected and jackknifed, and unceremoniously rolled the heavy armoured vehicle onto its side where it dragged for a while. Lord Detos leapt from the doomed vehicle and landed heavily. He was shaken but unwounded. He decided that having some kind of honourable duel was simply not his style. He reached for the mighty war horn that he carried in a large pouch at his hind, and blew on it with all of his strength. Behind him, the cliff face, which was clustered with the many siege engines Lord Detos collected, maintained, enchanted and improved, became apparent. Walls were lowered, many having a facade of rock or vegetation. There were arbalist crews, complex steam-powered ballistas and enchanted drow catapults and infernal machines from the east. Myrana knew it was time to go, and began expeditiously sprinting in a broken, unpredictable phase zigzag and stagger pattern, whilst rolling and twisting to avoid darts, arrows, crossbow bolts and catapult shots. His acrobatics was unmatched, and his keen peripheral vision and reflexes meant that he would instinctively evade the incoming barrage.